Okay, so let's jump out and back over into Canvas here real fast and start looking at specifically what we're going to do. Oh, Will, you forgot to log out, dude. All right. Okay. All right, so this week what we're going to be exploring is what we're going to be including is After Effects. And After Effects is a fantastic two-dimensional animation package that comes from our friends down at Adobe. After Effects is a purpose-built tool that directly addresses the computer animation pipeline for the cinema and the television spaces, right? If there is one tool that every animator should know, it's After Effects, in my opinion. Right? If you're a graphic designer, you're likely going to have one app that you're the strongest in, whether it be Photoshop or Illustrator, and then everything is going to run through there at one point or another. Those are going to be your Swiss Army knives. Well, for us in the animation world, our Swiss Army knife is After Effects. Okay? After Effects has been around since the beginning, since the dawn of the computer animation era in the mid-90s, and it really has turned into that super tool that everyone uses. Okay? So it's a pretty developed, very robust tool that allows us to work through the animation sequence a whole lot faster. And we're going to get a lot of bells and whistles that you guys probably have been clamoring for a long, long time, right? So for the next couple of weeks, we're not going to hand draw very much. And we're going to be asking the computer to draw a lot of things for us, okay? This is all in preparation for our final project, because we're going to be blending this two-dimensional, the hand-drawn animation pipeline that we've been exploring over the last, 8 weeks now, and the computer animation pipeline very directly, okay? And that really is a mirror to our modern animation workflow, is that it's a hybrid. It's not entirely one or entirely the other. There are computer-generated elements or computer-animated elements being used in the exact same frames as traditional cel-drawn animation engines. So we're going to be redoing the bouncing ball animation for our homework this week in After Effects. Okay? Now it's going to be a little bit easier than what we saw before, but let's jump in and start talking about the complexities of working in this brand new application. So Adobe After Effects, okay, is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud. We have it on every single machine here on campus. It's one of those pro tools that we just can't live without. Now that we're working in a new kind of collection of applications, I think it's really important to note that we're in the film and television production world. And the guys and gals down at Adobe have done us a solid, and they've grouped, and they've been good designers, right? And they've color-coded everything. So all the production apps for cinema and television are these lovely purple icons. CH, we're not going to talk much about this one because this is still a pipeline that's being developed. This is called Character Animator. And it's pretty neat. I'll let you guys explore it. There's some really great technology in Character Animator, but we're not going to be looking at that in this class. PR, does anyone know what this is? This is Adobe Premiere Pro, okay? Premiere Pro is our nonlinear video editing application that comes from Adobe. So this program is responsible for taking a whole bunch of individual media assets and then cut them together in a timeline and edit them into the final film. Premiere Pro is when all the animations and the film clips and sound effects and music files are going to come together to create fundamentally what you see show up on a television show or in a theater, right? It's our editing application. Well, After Effects, AE, is our animation package, our high-end broadcast quality and cinema quality professional animation environments. Let's just jump in real fast. This is a behemoth of an app. It takes a little bit to get going, so let it go for a second. This is like Media Encoder. There's a huge video architecture that it's building on the back end, or it's loading on the back end. And as you can see, it's still initializing. It's a big, big app. In every sense, it almost speaks to how robust and how complex this environment is. Entire films are done in After Effects. When I say high-end, I really do mean, here's a great example. Do you guys ever see that movie Sin City? All the visual effects, which is almost every single shot, was done in After Effects, right? It's a big-time app. It's widely used out there in our world. If there's one app that could be an industry standard app, it's After Effects. Okay. You go into any studio around the world and say, I know how to animate in After Effects, they're going to give you a gigantic thumbs up. It really is that important to our craft and our industry. So let's take a look at how this all works. Okay. After Effects, I apologize for the dark interface. Okay. Hopefully, with the lights off, it doesn't put you guys to sleep. So stay awake as best you can, right? After Effects, it's a behemoth. It's a big app. But really, when we take a step back and look at how it's all constructed, there are basically 4 different zones within the interface that we're going to be working in. This one over here, this is our project bin. This is where we're going to import assets in and start working with it. Now, these 2 in here have a direct link to each other. The middle part, this is our viewer. This is where we're going to be looking at the content on our timeline or a media asset. So it's going to be a window into either our composition or our footage. Okay? Very similar to the stage that we have over in Animate. Actually, it's identical to the stage that we have over in Animate. Downstairs, we have our timeline. This will become a little bit more prominent here in a minute once we start creating some content. But the timeline in function is almost identical to how the Animate timeline works. We'll see a whole series of frames. Of course, we'll also have a playhead that will allow us to interactively choose which frame we're viewing inside of our timeline. And then the right-hand side of our interface, way over here, these are just kind of utility panels. This allows us to go in and out of a whole series of different kind of mechanical areas of the application to do whatever that window is allowing us to do. So it's kind of like a properties panel for all of our things. So let's start importing some media in so we can begin to play around with it. Okay? Because in order for us to animate something, we have to have something in our bin to work with, right? After Effects is kind of an aggregator. It wants a whole bunch of stuff to be imported in. Kind of going back to this idea of a grand Swiss Army knife. We can import in any file type, any video type, any sound effect file. It really will take everything, right? Shoot, we could even throw a GIF in there if we wanted. It will take anything we throw at it, right? I know some folks that use After Effects just as a converter because we can literally throw any movie or video file at After Effects and it will spit something out the other side. That's how robust of a tool this really is. Now, I think for me, since I'm kind of in a weird mood, let's do this. I'm going to go and let's go on, and I'm just going to grab a Starbucks logo because I love Starbucks. I love Starbucks more than I should love Starbucks, right? What? Of course they're building another one. Of course they are. Of course they are. When I worked in downtown San Francisco, the intersection of where I worked, there was a Starbucks on every corner. So there was 4 Starbucks. Of course they're going to build another Starbucks. There was a shopping center, a grocery store, like a Raley's. Where was it? In the parking lot, there was a Starbucks, right? At Raley's. And then you go inside, and there was a Starbucks inside Raley's. It's just... Oh, man. Okay, anyways. So let me just find something here. This will do. Why not? Okay. And let me borrow this. Just put it on my desktop. All right. I'm just going to hide After Effects. And there's my good old Starbucks logo. I'm going to rename it. Instead of it just being a whole bunch of numbers and letters, Starbucks logo. All right. So let's jump back over to After Effects and import this asset in. Now we can create a whole bunch of assets inside of After Effects. We're totally allowed and encouraged to do that. More on that later, okay? But right now we're just going to import some stuff in, and you're encouraged to do this with your own stuff that you want, okay? If you want to play along, I would encourage you to do so, okay? So we need to import some assets in so we can start doing something with them, so we can start animating them. I want to animate my Starbucks logo going from the left side to the right side, okay? So in order to import an asset in, it's super easy. There's a couple ways you can do it, but just like we did over in Animate, File, Import, File. Command-I is the keyboard shortcut, just like we see over in Animate. Let me go navigate to where I stored my Starbucks logo, and there she blows. Ta-da! There it is. The bin in After Effects turns into kind of like a gigantic folder of stuff, assets, that we then can incorporate into our animation. When we first import it in, it really isn't a member of any animation. It's available to be used in any timeline that we create here in After Effects. With the logo selected or with this asset selected, you can see above it, it gives us a whole bunch of information about that asset. This area of our bin kind of turns into like a spreadsheet of data and metadata of that asset. So a lot of information is exposed, okay, which is really great for us. After Effects tries to make all the technical parameters of whatever is selected exposed and very transparent. So I like that. It makes it easy. So now that I got an asset in, let's talk about how After Effects references the location of that asset. Now, when we're working with Animate, you definitely see this in Photoshop, right? Let's just take Photoshop. That seems to be a common denominator for a lot of us in here, right? You import an asset into Photoshop, into your Photoshop document. You hit Command S. What then happens to that imported photograph in your Photoshop document? Where does it now live? It's embedded. It's in the Photoshop document, right? Our PSDs kind of turn into gigantic briefcases for the media that we're using inside of them, right? After Effects does not do that, okay? Absolutely does not do that. After Effects works kind of like a website works. It links to the current location of that media, right? So with that in mind, let's see what happens when I change the location of that file. So I imported my Starbucks logo at my desktop, and watch what happens when I put this in my secret folder here on my instructor station. I'm just moving the file. I'm not doing anything in After Effects. I'm just changing the location of the file. We jump back over into After Effects. It goes, uh-oh, warning. We can't find the logo. Okay, it's gone. It's looking for this asset in a very specific location. After Effects makes an absolute direct link to the location of the file that we imported it from. Okay? It's not a relative link, it's an absolute link. Okay? So if we move the location of that file, if it's anywhere than there, After Effects doesn't know where to point. Okay? I said okay. There's really nothing we can do other than hit OK. So if we go back into our bin, you can see that it really is starting to get confused, right? Does anyone know what we're seeing there in the thumbnail? What's it called? Color bars. And you're going to see this all over the professional cinema and television world. What is the function of color bars? You see this all the time, right? I'm sure you probably have seen that pattern at some point or another if you watch a lot of television.
There's nothing here pattern.
It's the nothing here pattern. I like it, yeah, to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. But why do they choose that pattern? Yep, absolutely. And if you look at the colors that are in there, we got pretty much every color represented.
Yeah, because they have their yellows, their cyan, and their magenta.
Yep, and red and yep. And then we have a gradient of black and whites. Okay, this is a calibration image, right? In the broadcast and cinema world, the color bars are used to tune both the internal broadcast equipment to the right color, the right color kind of spectrum. And we also use this image when we have on televisions to tune the colors and the brightness, the contrast of all of our televisions, right? I have done this, and I have gotten weird looks from people. This was a long time ago. I remember I went into, where was it? Best Buy? I think it was Best Buy. And I came in with a DVD that had color bars on it, right? Because I was buying a TV, and I was like, hey, do you mind if I put color bars up on your TV? And all the salespeople were like, what are you talking about, right? I was like, oh, I want to see how each one of these TVs reproduces the color spectrum, right? I want to make sure that the TV I buy is going to be a good enough TV to show me all the shades of gray that I want and to correctly reproduce the white, the green, you know, the blue especially. The blue is really important for us when it comes to calibration. And they all looked at me and they went, no, that's crazy. And I went, all right. So it's an important image for us when calibrating things. It's the first thing I do. You go to Costco, never judge the picture quality on what you see at Costco. Everything's turned up, right? Saturation is super high. The brightness is almost completely full tilt, right? It is a complete fabrication of what the color settings actually are. They're trying to they're trying to sell a TV, not show what this TV can actually do, right? Color bars are the only way to accurately calibrate your TV, okay? If you want more information on it, and this is, I encourage you to do this. Go on to YouTube and just do a simple search for color bar calibrations for TVs. They will show you exactly how to load this image onto your TV and then to adjust the brightness, the gamma, the color spectrum, the saturation, everything to correctly get the right image, because there are some rules that we need to follow. It's a good exercise to go through. It really is. I remember back in the good old standard definition days when they were selling the DVD format, right? When we were transitioning from VHS over to DVDs, the DVDs had all these lovely extras that came on our DVDs, right? They don't do that anymore. There's like 4 hours of documentary work. Yeah. They had all these bells and whistles to help promote and sell the DVD as a format, as the next generation format. And I remember, where was it? I think it was all the Pixar films actually had a color calibrator on there for you. And it had like Woody, you know, sitting there on Toy Story, and he'd help you calibrate your TV to make sure that it would, that all the images and the colors would be reproduced correctly. Tangent, I apologize, gone way too far. But when you see color bars in the context of After Effects, danger, Will Robinson, okay? Something has gone wrong. After Effects cannot fundamentally find the asset that you're looking for, okay? So we need to relink it. We need to repoint After Effects to the current location of that file. And luckily, it's really easy to do it. It's not automatic, okay? You have to go through this process, okay? And it's really easy to go through this process. So if we were to right-click on the asset, and this is any asset, this is going to be the same for a video file, for an image, for a sound effect. You right-click on it. Convention will say, hey, reload footage, right? But that's going to try to reload this asset in the location that After Effects is looking for it, right? Well, it can't find this asset, so it's not, reload's not going to do a single thing, okay? What we want to do is replace footage. And we're basically going to replace it with itself, okay? So we do File, and now I go to my super secret location on this computer. See, here's the location of my Starbucks logo. Just double click on it, and then boom, we're back, okay? Those color bars have been restored, and life is good. Here's my suggestion to you, and this is honestly how I would recommend that you work with all of your assets, okay? Don't put them in 1,000 files or 1,000 different locations on your machine, okay? That is, you're setting yourself up for failure, okay? After Effects kind of expects that you're professional media managers, that you understand how it's linking and how it's loading in all this content. So it's hoping that you have some good chops, and let's make sure that we do, okay? So here's how I would work, and this is honestly how I do it. I have a folder, okay? And let's just call this apps. No, I did twice. Pat's Silly Anim. Okay? This is going to be the name of the animation that I'm going to create here in a second, right? This is now going to become the root project directory for this entire animation. Now, inside that folder, we're going to add some subfolders, okay? I always have one that's assets. What do you think is going to go in there? Yeah, this is all the raw assets. So I'm going to move the Starbucks logo back to that folder here in a minute. Before I import anything into After Effects, if I know I'm going to use it or if I'm even considering use it, I put it in that folder before I import it in, okay? Let's do it real fast. Move it back into my assets folder. Oops, I missed it. There we go. All right. Of course, After Effects is going to freak out because once again, I've changed the location on it, but that's okay. I'll just right-click, replace footage, file. So on my desktop, Pat Silly, assets, there we go. Voila. And then in addition, this is what I also do. When I save my After Effects project, where am I going to put it? In that folder, okay? Now, when it comes time for us to leave or change computers, now if you think about it, in this one folder, I have all of my assets, all of my project files, and I even go one step further, and I put all my renders in this one place. It really does become the root parent location for all things related to this one animation, right? We've created a great little briefcase for all of our content. If all of your assets are stored in this folder, the likelihood of After Effects figuring out where that folder is and where those assets are in this structure is very, 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 very high. Okay? If all of your assets are in 10 different locations across your machine, you're dancing with the devil. Okay? That's building your house on sand.
So you save that file to like a thumb drive or something?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And take it to another machine? It's not referencing like the desktop?
It's not. Yeah, it's looking, if you look at the file path, it's looking back one level first, right? So if that one level, so if this is where it's looking in this location first for the assets folder, and then if it doesn't find it, then it goes to the desktop. If it doesn't find it there, and then it starts, I think that's kind of where it stops, in all honesty. So if everything's in that one folder, chances are good, very good, that everything will be relinked correctly upon opening at a new location.
Unless you're no
You know, part of being a professional is managing all this stuff, right? And there's a reason for this too, right? This is not just to kind of make our lives a whole lot more difficult, right? But when you're working on like the next Star Wars film, okay, or the next Avengers film that's coming out here in a minute, you're going to be rolling all of your assets through After Effects to do any number of different things, right? Those files are going to be huge, right? Does anyone know, the word raw in the photography word is kind of a buzzword right now. Because we're really now just we're able to kind of work with raw images. We've been doing it in the photography world for a bit, but in the cinematography world, this is now something that we're kind of able to do with great speed and rapidity, okay? But the files in a raw workflow are huge. Does anyone know how many megabytes one raw frame coming from a high-end like Red camera is going to be at like 4K? It's nuts. One frame is going to be like 130 megabytes of data, right? So After Effects links to all those assets to make the process of managing those assets a little bit easier. We're no longer requiring the transference of this asset, this After Effects project file, to include all that media, right? The high-end workflows, the big studios, all the raw assets are stored in a centralized server, and then the only thing the artist pulls down off that server is your After Effects project file, so it links externally. And wherever that After Effects project file rolls in the studio, it's always going to be linking back to that same centralized point. So there are some great benefits. Great benefits of working like this, right? I used to do this all the time when I worked in San Francisco. Someone would send me, we worked with artists all around the world, right? And we would FedEx them a hard drive of data, right? Because we'd go on set, we'd film some green screen stuff, and then we'd send our files. We were working with a whole bunch of artists in Africa, right? And we literally put all the content, all the raw files onto a hard drive, okay? One of those rugged, padded hard drives. We had like this much bubble wrap around the hard drive and stuff. And then we send it over to Africa, literally FedEx the hard drive to Africa, right? This is before broadband, by the way. This is like 2000, okay? And we'd FedEx the hard drive, then we'd email the After Effects project file, right? Because the After Effects project file is like kilobytes in size. And then they would open up that After Effects project file, relink all the media real fast. Takes all of 2 seconds to do that, and they're up and running. And then when they were done with their work, what did they send us? They just emailed us back the After Effects project file, which is just a couple kilobytes in size, right? And I'd relink all my media to all to the exact same media that I had sent them in the FedEx, right? And I'm up and running. It's a great workflow. It makes it really easy. Okay. Enough of that mumbo jumbo. Let's have some fun, because we're not having fun yet, okay? Larger point being, you got to manage your media. You got to bring all these files with you, which is a big difference between the Animate workflow and the Photoshop workflow, okay? So over in Animate, we needed to create a stage, and we're used to doing this over in Photoshop as well, where we create physically a composition. Now, what is the stage and the composition kind of existentially represent, The screen, absolutely, right? It represents the boundary where our artwork or our animations are going to take place, right? We need to fundamentally create something that is analogous to that world, okay? In After Effects, our stage is called the composition. Our animations have to exist within a composition, okay? I want to take my little Starbucks logo and animate it going from the left side to the right side, okay? So I need to create a composition first. There's two ways we can do this. Of course, the gigantic button in your viewer that says New Composition is one way, which is good. In addition, we also have the Composition pull-down menu, which will physically fire off the exact same command. You're going to get a pretty intimidating palette that's going to pop up in front of you, okay? It's not too dissimilar than what we're used to seeing over there in Animate. We have an opportunity to name our composition and name your compositions. Please name your compositions, right? Don't just, if you ever turn in something that's like Comp 1, you know, that's bad form, right? Because the default name is Comp 1. So name it something, give it a purpose, give it a role inside of our animation production pipeline, okay? We're also, for the time being, going to be using the exact same height and width parameters that we saw over inside of Animate. So 1280 by 720. This is part of our industry standard, collection of video formats. We can't just do what we want to do, right? We have to follow some very strict guidelines on how we establish all of our frame sizes. Luckily for us, the good old folks down at Adobe have done us a solid, and they've given us a list of presets that we can load in that represent all of those standards. And yes, those are just a portion of the standards that we in the video and the television world and the cinema world have to follow. It's kind of intimidating, okay? Luckily, 1280 by 720 is a good thing to remember. We've been working with it the entire semester. Also, our frame rate is going to be 24, okay? This happened earlier in the week. Someone had this checkbox enabled. So if that's enabled, it's going to try to preserve this aspect ratio. So if I was like 1024, see how it automatically changes that bottom value? Some folks were missing that if you uncheck it, then you can type in the values independently from each other. Okay. Now, so we got the frame width and height, the pixel aspect ratio. This is the shape of our pixels. Did you guys know that our pixels are different shapes? Probably not, right? In the video world, well, let me rephrase this. On every single LCD screen, so these folks, okay, and these folks here, our pixels are square. How about that, huh? Right? Bet you didn't know that. I didn't know that. And then someone a long time ago said, pixels are square, and then also in the video world, our pixels are not square in the video world, okay? Our pixels are rectangular in the video world, okay? Which is why we can change their aspect ratio. For most things, if you know that it's going to go on an LCD screen, on a phone, on a computer monitor, leave it at square. If you know you're entering into the broadcast world, the professional video, and the professional cinema world, that aspect ratio is going to change, right? There's a couple things that determines the shape of our images. One absolutely is the height and width, but the other, and more importantly in the video and cinema space, is the pixel aspect ratio, right? That's what makes our images more rectangular than square, right? Common stumbling point for a lot of folks, right? I was working with an artist last semester, or maybe the semester before, and she was doing some motion graphics that were showing up in front of a movie theater, in front of a movie, excuse me, on those big screens, right? Those local advertisements that they show in front of a movie, right? Because now whenever we go to the movies, we gotta sit through like 30 minutes of commercials, right? Well, she was doing a whole bunch of animations for that screen size, and she was confused as to why certain areas of her image that were near the boundaries were getting stretched and pulled, right? We looked at her file, and it was the pixel aspect ratio. She had done everything in square, and they were broadcasting in non-square pixels, so everything was getting stretched. Her circles turned into ovals because the image was getting pulled, and a couple pixels were getting clipped off the screen, and had everything to do with the pixel aspect ratio. Yes, it was. It really, the cool thing about working in After Effects, I'm going to turn the lights on. The cool thing about working in After Effects is that you can always revisit these settings at any time and make a change. However, some changes are going to require you to reanimate, okay, and definitely re-render. So, all right, the next thing, I apologize, timecode. Different, okay? Over in Animate, what are we used to seeing? Frames, okay? Now here in After Effects, this is what our timecode looks like. Let's start to decode what this means, because there is a pattern and there's a method behind the madness that we need to be very mindful of. Because in this space, in the professional animation world, we're going to be displaying things just a little bit different. So this is what it looks like. Has anyone figured out the pattern? What all these collections of zeros represent? It does? You got it. You got it. And it's actually just hours, not days. Thankfully, it's not days. Whew. So we got hours. Right? Yeah, this marker's dying. Here, I'm going to do something that no one does. And throw away a dry erase marker. Whew. I know, it's liberating. I feel good. Do you guys feel good? I feel good about it. All right, so we got hours. Oh, yeah, that's much better. Hours, minutes, seconds. What's this last one? Or, very specifically, for us, frames, right? It's actually just frames, okay? It's frames. Yeah, or 24. Yeah, 24 frames in a second. So this is a gigantic counter, okay? It starts over here, and then as this gets to, if in our world, we work at either 2397 or 24 frames a second, okay? So once this gets to 23, then it'll say 01, and this counter will start over again, okay? So in After Effects, we get to determine how our time code is going to start. For most things, just leave it as is, right? But I know a lot of animation studios that change it, and they want everything to start like this. Start at 1, okay? So it just depends. Point being is you can change it, and you can change it, and you should change it, okay, if you need to. Before I started teaching, I worked at a film studio here in town, and one of the last big things that I worked on was a 6-part miniseries for the state of California. It's called California Prisons Under Pressure, and it was a fantastic short-form documentary all about the current state of the California prison system, right? And it was a really cool project. I thoroughly enjoyed working on it. But it was a 6-part miniseries, right? So we did about 5 hours worth of, final finished product, right? Are there any photographers in here? I do a lot of photography, right? In order to get one good photograph, how many photographs do you have to take? Huh? Hopefully not 50. Yeah, it changes from person to person. But for me, it's about 10 to 1. For every 10 pictures that I take, one of those is going to be good, right? So for 5 hours worth of final finished content, we're in the literally, kind of 6,000 to 7,000 individual media files that we had to manage, right? And we got a gold mine of data too, right? Because no one knew about this, right? But the state of California hired a production company like 15 years ago, right? To go around to this is before we were involved, right? Way before we were involved. They hired a production studio to go around to every state prison in the state of California and film B-roll, right? And does anyone know what B-roll is in the video sense? B-roll, you see B-roll every single day. If you watch the news, most of the news is B-roll. You have the talking head interview, and then they start to cut to, if they're interviewing, you see this all the time with the news. They send some poor soul up to here in snow, right? Up, in the mountains whenever it starts snowing. So they have the news anchor sitting up to here in snow, talking about how much it snows, and then they cut to a video file of like the snow coming down, right? The cars driving in the snow, right? The people that on the side of the road, they help put the chains on the tires.
Same footage,
Yeah, That's B-roll. It's a visualization of what the content, what the interview, what the A-roll is talking about, right? So we had about 300 hours of B-roll, right? That was just given to us, right, for the state of California. They said, here's B-roll shots of every prison, right? Including like B-roll of like prison riots and people like shanking each other and stuff. And I was like, holy cow, I am not going to prison after looking at all this stuff, right? So I had to come up with an organizational system, and I used Timecode to organize it all, right? And Timecode is a big lifesaver because it's a marker system. It basically turns every asset into something that we can search very quickly by numerically, right? I don't remember the exact structure now because this was literally like 15, 16 years ago now. But I remember grabbing every photographer that went out the door on the way to go interview someone, and I told them, I was like, whenever you go interview someone, put their time code, the start time code on your cameras to 1 hour, right? So every asset that starts with 1, I'll just know by looking at the time code that that's an interview. I don't have to open up the clip. I can just look at the time code, and I'll know what its content is, right? And I think 1 was all interviews, 2 was all B-roll. I think 3 was voiceover audio narration that we recorded. 4 was motion graphics. I mean, we had a huge system, and it was a lifesaver because then I could just sort my entire bin by timecode. I could very quickly find what I'm looking for, right? So timecode has a big, huge, monumental role inside of our world. Get used to seeing it. Get used to playing with it, right? It's something that's not going to go away. This system is used by every single professional studio in the world, okay? So it's time for us to start to graduate into that space as well. All right. So we can, of course, change the start time code, but we also change the duration. Another big difference between our timelines here in After Effects versus what we see over in Animate. Okay? Animate, our timelines were infinite. Okay? They just went on and forever and ever and ever and ever. That's not our space. This is not like it's not like Premiere Pro or Animate, in that we have defined durations for all of our timelines. So right now, based off our little simple conversation about timecode, how long is my animation going to be? 6 seconds. Okay, if I wanted it to make it 15 seconds, what do I need to do? To 1.5, you got it. If I wanted it to be an hour, yeah, change that 0 to 1. Okay? Never make an hour-long composition, by the way. That's Bad News Bears. All right, that's a bad idea. I've done that a couple times, and it's not fun. All right, let's hit the OK button. And once we hit OK, now that we have a composition, the rest of our interface kind of hums to life. Okay? Our timeline becomes active. You can actually see down here. Gives us a great badge. We have timecode reader. We have an area in which we can start to compose our animation. This little blue line with the guitar pick looking thing up here at the top, that's our playhead. We're used to seeing this over in Animate. It functions identically to how it works over in Animate. And then most importantly, we have our viewer, and this is the window into our timeline. So what we produce and what we create down here in our timeline is reflected in our composition viewer. Okay? All right, let's just do fit. That way you can see it. All right, so next question. How do I get my Starbucks logo into my composition? The bin is just a repository, okay? It's just a place for us to collect things. It doesn't actually serve a function while it's in the bin, but the project bin. We have to get it into our animation, into this composition. How can we do that real quickly? Click and drag. And this is the cool thing about working in the Adobe kind of pipeline, right? Is that there's a lot of commonality between all the apps. Let's just do it real quick. Here's my Starbucks logo. I'm just going to drag it down here into the timeline, bloop, and it pops in. In addition, I'm going to hit undo. You can also just left click and drag it like that into the viewer, and it will pop in. So 6 to 1, half a dozen to another. Okay? With an asset chilling inside of our composition, we now have some details in our timeline that we can examine. Okay, there's a lot of bells and whistles, buttons and knobs in the After Effects timeline. Okay, it really speaks to the market that this application serves. Okay, but there are some things that are kind of new for us, right? So if you look carefully over here in my timeline, here's our playhead. Here's the first frame of our animation at 0, 0, 0, time code. And then way over here, here's the end. The duration of this animation is only 6 seconds. It's pretty short. Now, for this layer, it's represented in our timeline by a gigantic purple bar. Okay? These big gigantic bars in our timeline represent how long that specific layer is going to be seen in the the kind of the context of this animation. So right now, because the bar it fills that entire timeline, are we going to see this thing the entirety of my animation? Yes. What if I only want to see it for like 2 seconds? Yeah, we should trim it. The length of the bar determines how long that asset's going to be seen in our animation. So I need to go in and do what's called a trim. I need to trim the in point and the out point of this clip so kind of get it down to the duration that I'm looking for. Now what's cool about After Effects is that to trim this asset, I'm just going to move my cursor to the boundaries of that bar. See how it changes? Bloop, bloop. That little left and right arrow allows me to interactively trim the duration of this layer. So I'm going to just left click and drag it to the right. I'm going to do the exact same thing way over here on the out point. Just click and drag it to the left. And now I'm interactively trimming the duration of that asset. And it's only going to show on screen now for, I don't know, not even, let's see, there's a second. So now that we're only going to see my Starbucks logo where that bar is. So if I was to move my playhead to the beginning, when am I going to see that Starbucks logo? Yeah, right about there at 1 second. So what am I going to see until 1 second into my animation? Nothing, just blackness or the background color of our composition. There it goes, and then it's off. Okay? So we're only going to see that asset for as long as that bar is in our timeline. Okay? The space bar is the keyboard shortcut to start and stop the playhead. There it goes. Boop. Okay. So maybe I want to make it longer. Play it, and it's on its way. Pretty cool, huh? It's pretty cool. After Effects does an excellent job of honoring the frame rate. It's going to play back at the frame rate of your composition, which is pretty great. Animate often plays back faster than our frame rate. It's trying to play our timeline as fast as that computer can manage it. At times, when you have like a zillion layers in here, and if you're working with 5 or 6 layers that are like full 4K resolution, that are huge in file size, and you have like 8 effects on them, then the playback rate and the playback speed is going to be a little bit lower. It's going to dip down, but it's never going to go above, which is kind of nice. So your animation is never going to be faster than the frame rate of your composition. Okay, so I have my Starbucks logo here. It's just a couple seconds long. What if I want to move this asset? What if I only want to see it at the end of my composition and not just the beginning of it? Yeah, just move the bar. How am I going to move it?
Click on the purple bar, right?
Where in the purple bar? Yeah, in the middle, because if you click on the ends, we're trimming the in and the out points, right? When this clip is going to start and stop. But if we click in the middle, and you'll see this once I do it, see I had that new little kind of icon shows up, those 4 little vertical lines. Now I'm moving this asset. I'm not changing its local duration inside of our composition, I'm moving it. So now I can move it way over here and know that it's still maintaining that duration I set earlier. So now I'll see nothing but black for 4 seconds or so, and then finally, boop, it'll pop in. And by default, After Effects loops our timeline when we hit the space bar, which is kind of nice. Again, purpose-built for the animation workflow. Okay? All right. So I think what I'm going to do is just extend the endpoint of my little object way back to the first frame of my animation. So we've imported an asset, we've created a composition, we've included that asset in our composition. Now let's start working with the transform channels, okay, for this layer. I need to make my Starbucks logo a little bit smaller so I can animate it going from the left side to the right side. Okay? Every single layer, and this doesn't matter if it's a video file, a picture, an animation, it does not matter, is going to come with 5 basic transform channels. These transform channels are the building blocks of the entire animation engine inside of After Effects. If you look carefully, there's a lot of icons and a lot of switches, but there's one on each layer. So here it is. This is just our Starbucks logo.png. But every single layer is going to have this little triangle. It's called a disclosure arrow. And this is the After Effects function of kind of expanding and collapsing very complex lists of channels. Check it out. So if I click on this little white arrow, bloop, now I've accessed the transform channels. And once again, I have another little white arrow which says what? Click me. There's more stuff inside of me. Whenever we see a white little arrow, a white little triangle, it says, hey, there's elements nested inside of here. Bloop. There they are. They're the 5 transform channels that come with every single layer inside of After Effects. These 5 transform channels are responsible for the basic movement and animation of this layer. So you have anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And opacity is just a really fancy word for transparency, right? 100% it's opaque, 0% is transparent. We've seen this over in other apps, okay? So I need to make my Starbucks logo a little smaller. Of course, I could individually just left-click on any of these channels and numerically type something in. Or if you notice, once again, when I hover over the blue text, my cursor changes. Got a little hand with a double arrow. Yeah, there's sliders. So if you just left-click and drag, we can interactively change the values of whatever channel we're working on just by left-clicking and dragging. And that's a little bit better for me because I'm a little bit more visual than I am mathematical. So now I can make it smaller. I need to have it positioned on the screen left side of my composition. That's where these 2 position values come in. Now I have 2 of them. What? Why do I have 2 of them? X and Y. This is a 2-dimensional, at the default, it's a 2-dimensional animation package, right? So we're plotting points and animating our objects along the X and the Y axis, okay? Now, of course, you could numerically go in and change these values, but I'm just going to left-click and drag, and they're sliders. To make it really easy, check this out. As long as I'm in the direct selection tool, and this is where our toolbar is, okay, as long as I'm in the direct selection tool, I can interactively grab my asset in the composition viewer. I can drag it around. Of course, I can grab the corners and disproportionately scale it. If I hold down the Shift key while I grab and drag the corners, we'll uniformly scale it. Okay, so I'm free to go in and click, hold down Shift, and then scale it. Free to interactively do that right here in my timeline as well, or my composition viewer as well. Okay, so we don't have to use all of those numbers downstairs. Actually, I use them very infrequently. So now that I've positioned my Starbucks logo where I want it to be, I need to start getting it ready to animate. And there are basically 4 steps, 4 major steps to animating anything inside of After Effects. Sorry, old habit. The first step is to define when we want our animation to begin. Now for me, given the context of what I'm doing here, I want to have my animation start right here at the beginning, the first frame. So step number 1 is to move the playhead when we want our animation to begin. Step number 2 is that we have to define what we're going to animate. Okay? What channel we're going to ask the computer to animate for us. Okay? Now for me, I'm going to animate this thing going from the left side to the right side. So what channel do I want to ask the computer to animate? Yeah, the position channel. Now, step 3 is to create a keyframe. Okay? Now, we know a lot about keyframes in this class. We've been spending probably 75% of our time over the last 9 weeks or 8 weeks or so talking about keyframes. Now, the cool thing about working in After Effects is that we're going to create the keyframes, and the computer is going to do all the in-betweens for us, which is kind of nice. But we still have to go in and initialize the keyframes. We have to create them. Step number 3 is creating a keyframe, and we've got to click on this little stopwatch. Okay? The first keyframe that we create is created when we click on this stopwatch. This kind of like arms the channel for animation. It tells the computer that this channel is going to start registering keyframes on it. We're not trying to animate all 5 of my transform channels. We're just trying to animate one of them. So by clicking on that stopwatch, we're kind of selecting that channel for animation. The first time we click on it, the computer automatically creates a keyframe for us. Now my playhead's in the way. Let's just take a look-see at it real fast. There it is. And then that is the icon for a keyframe. Okay? You're going to see this all over the place. This is the Adobe icon for keyframes. They stole this icon when they started doing this in Photoshop, right? I remember one of my colleagues got really excited. He's like, "Pat, we can do animation inside of Photoshop." And I went, "Uh-huh. Yeah, I've been doing this in like After Effects for like 15 years, man." Right? So this diamond has a big role for us. It's a common icon that Adobe uses for all of their keyframes. Now, I like to think of these keyframes inside of our computer sense kind of like those little plastic eggs that you see. You know, it's almost Easter, so if you celebrate Easter, you probably get those little plastic eggs from time to time, and on the inside, you open them up, there's like a little Hershey Kiss sometimes, like an M&M or like a jelly bean or something, right? Well, instead of a delicious jelly bean on the inside of those little plastic eggs, what we have, if we were to crack open that diamond, are these 2 values. We store data in those keyframes, right? We're telling the computer that at this moment in time, at the location of the keyframe, this channel is going to be these numbers, okay? It's just a value that's inside of it. Now, when we have 2 of these keyframes in our timeline, the computer is going to transition between these values, okay? Let's see what that looks like, because that's actually the 4th and final step of our animation process. Step 1 was to define when our animation was going to begin. Step 2 was to define what is going to be animated. Step 3 is to create a keyframe for that channel. And step 4 is to move our playhead. Actually, it's kind of a step 4A and step 4B. We've got to move the playhead, and then we got to move our object. If you're following along and you see this little dotted line, this motion path appear inside your composition viewer, congratulations, you've done it. Okay? But let's return just to the timeline for a second and have a quick exploration of what physically has happened. Okay? Because now we have 2 different diamonds, 2 different keyframes for the position channel. This is the first one I created when I clicked on the stopwatch. And then when I moved the playhead and then moved the asset, it auto-keyed and automatically created a second keyframe for me, which is kind of nice. Now I'm going to move my playhead back to the previous keyframe just for a second. Okay, so these are the values that we're seeing inside of this keyframe. Okay, don't even have to select it. It's always going to tell you the value of wherever the playhead is, right? Now watch what happens as I go to this other keyframe. The value is different, especially on the X. We're at 115 on that keyframe. Over here we're on 181. What's cool about this is that on frame 2, check it out. What's happening? The value's automatically changing, right? This is called interpolation, where the computer cycles and transitions from one data point to another data point for us automatically. And what we get in all this is, of course, animation. This is the foundation of our entire computer animation pipeline in all computer animation applications. It doesn't matter if you're doing this in After Effects, Maya, Cinema 4D, Modo. It all works off of the exact same principle. We set the keyframes, the computer is going to transition between those 2 keyframes for us. It's called interpolation. Okay? It's also called tweening. Some apps just call it tweening, Why would it be called tweening? Yeah, no, and seriously, that is it. It's because the computer is doing the in-betweens for us, right? I'm thankful, and I think hopefully it's understood, especially in this class, that the developers have referenced that classic animation pipeline. You know, the pipeline that was invented back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s is echoed in what we see in our computer tool set today, which is very, very cool. Very cool. All right, I tell you what, I've been going for about an hour and a half. Let's take just a small little break, and then we'll come back in and we'll start talking about how we can edit our motion paths for our animation this week. Okie dokie. So right before we left for our break, this is kind of the animation that we had created, right? Just a simple going left to right. Now I want to just take a second and examine what we can do with these keyframes, right? Because these keyframes, like most things inside of After Effects, are not written in stone. We can move them around. We can adjust their timing. By clicking and dragging on these keyframes, we can adjust the speed of our movement. Now, given our existing experience inside the animation production pipeline, what's going to happen if I was to take that keyframe right there and then move it to the left? It's going to move faster. The on-screen movement's going to be the same because we're not changing the data that's inside the little diamonds, but the time it takes to transition between those two data is going to be shortened, right? So check it out. If I move, I'm just going to select one. You can either drag out a box or just click on it. And then I'm going to drag it to the left. Animation still stays the same, right? But the time that it takes to complete that animation is going to be a whole lot faster. Now, I want you to notice very carefully the motion path, because this motion path is a good thing, and it gives us a lot of really great small little factoids right there in the viewer. Specifically, I want you to look at all the basic building blocks of that little motion path, that little dotted line. There's some squares, there's some dots, there's some big dots. What do all of those, oops, excuse me. I just hit the wrong key on accident. I hit the delete key. That was not good. Oh no, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, excuse me for a second while I reanimate this real quick. There we go. Okay, that's good enough. So I want you to look very carefully at this motion path because there's some squares, there's some big dots, there's some small dots. What do all of these things mean? Because there is a purpose behind them. Okay. For those of you that are following along, what do the small dots on our motion path represent? Each frame. Each frame. So the distribution of all those dots gives us a nice visualization of how long this animation is going to take, right? How fast this object's moving. My dots are spaced out pretty good. So this is good. So each one of those dots represents a frame. So this is going to be a pretty fast movement. Okay. Inversely, if I was to change the distance, change the timing of my animation by changing the distance between the keyframes, watch what happens to those dots. Okay. Now they're much closer. They're tightly packed along the motion path, which suggests very directly that my animation is slower. Okay? So pay attention to those dots on your motion path. It's a great little visualization to how fast and how slow a part of your animation is going to be. Now we also, let me just stop my animation here. Okay. Now we also have some cubes right here and right here. What do those cubes represent on our timeline?
Those are the endpoints for the center of your image.
It is very much, but they actually have, it's that and one other important thing. They're the keyframes, and specifically, it's a visualization of the location that's saved in a keyframe, right? And these are editable inside the composition viewer. Check it out. I can just grab this first keyframe and change its position inside of my frame itself. So it's very interactive, this whole viewer thing. I haven't changed the timing of the animation, but by changing the location of the keyframe representation, if you will, on our motion path, I've completely redone this animation quickly. Okay. Now, also on the motion path, we have some small dots. We got these little cubes over here. What in the world is that thing? So we got a big dot in there. Yeah. So if I was to, let's see if I can do it real fast without clicking off it. If you were to very carefully click on the big dot, check it out. Now, cool, huh? We can make arcs. Almost kind of like little pseudo Bezier handles, okay? Now on this bottom keyframe, this one over here, there it is. Sometimes you have to select it in order to get it. So we can craft very complex animations pretty quickly just by changing the tangent handles of our keyframes, which is pretty neat. That would be traditionally pretty difficult to animate. And here in good old After Effects, it just takes, but a second or so. Cool, huh? So these motion paths play a big, huge role in the creation of our animations here inside of After Effects. All right. Now, we can animate multiple channels at the exact same time inside of After Effects. We don't have to animate just the position. Of course, if I wanted to go in, I certainly could change the position, scale, and rotation of this guy throughout the entirety of this movement. So you can do multiple channels at the exact same time. By exposing the transform channels, maybe I want my little guy to change its size. So I click on the stopwatch, which generates a keyframe. And then over here, let's change this to, I don't know, 10%. And now it's a little baby logo. You see that it's moving and scaling at the exact same time. So we're free to go in and animate as many of these transform channels as we want, right? And as you get more comfortable and as we get more advanced in our kind of fluency of working inside of After Effects, there's going to be a bunch of channels that we're going to be animating. We have talked about 0.1% of the animation capability inside of After Effects, okay? It's pretty great. We're going to get to a point where we're going to have little marionettes and little puppets inside of After Effects, and we're going to be, having them walk down the street, and it's going to be pretty rad. You're going to dig it. It's a lot of fun, okay? But much like the challenges that we face over in Animate, we have to get our animations out of After Effects and into an industry standard format that we can then publish to Facebook or YouTube or wherever, or cut into a film, right? Our animation only exists on this timeline in this animation After Effects project file, okay? So we now need to render our animations, and rendering our animations inside of After Effects is honestly not too dissimilar from the production pipeline that we saw over in Animate. There's a lot of commonalities. This is one of the big benefits of being part of that Adobe umbrella, right? Is that the Adobe developers try very strongly to make sure that we as artists can transition between all these apps and kind of have a similar kind of experience, which is nice. The one thing that we need to do, however, is to direct the render engine to the animation or the composition that we want to export, okay? We need to select our composition in order for After Effects to cleanly export that composition. And there's really two ways that we can do it, okay? If you notice down here in my timeline, I only have a single composition, okay? However, if I was to have another composition, let's call this one Test. Okay, see how we have another composition. This is another animation called Test. Then I have Pat's Silly Animation. See how there's a big white line under it, and it's the title of the composition's in bold? We need to make sure that the animation that we're exporting is selected in our timeline, okay? We direct After Effects to export just that one animation, right? Another way that we can direct After Effects to export what we want is to physically select it inside the bin. So if I want to export out this composition, just click on it. Whatever is selected is going to be exported. So we can either select it in the bin, as I've done here, or just select it down here in our timeline by ensuring that it's underlined and bold. With our composition selected, it really is just as easy as going File, Export, and then dun-da-da-da. Once again, Adobe Media Encoder is going to have a big role in everything that we do, okay? However, you got to be patient. It's going to package up your After Effects project file and send all that data over into the Media Encoder. Let me show you. It's going to take a good beat or so. And the first time, and maybe even the second or third time you do this, on the surface, it's going to feel like you haven't done anything. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Watch what happens to my interface. And I want to bring up my dock too, just so you guys can really see it. Okay, so there's my dock. File, Export. Now, I clicked on a button. Did you see any sort of feedback from the computer that something's happened? No. And if the developers of Adobe are listening, they should do something to let me know that I've done something. Because, there it is. Now Media Encoder just now launched. It takes a good 10, 20, 30 seconds or so for Media Encoder to even initialize and give you some feedback that something is in fact happening. my least favorite thing to say as a teacher is, trust me, something's going on, right? When you hit a button, just trust me, in the background something's happening, but in this case it's honest. You hit the button and in the background a lot's going on, right? Once Adobe Media Encoder is initialized, again you're probably saying, Pat, nothing's in my queue. What? Did this work? And this is usually the moment where you start thinking that you've done something wrong, but boop, there it is. My file just now popped up. So even when Adobe Media Encoder launches, it then takes another 20 or 30 seconds or so before the file that you're trying to render pops into the queue. Point being, click the button, go check your email, right? Click your button, click the export button from After Effects, and go like, you know, I don't know, whatever you guys are doing. Go check Instagram these days, right? I'm not of the Instagram generation, so I don't know anything about that, right? I'm of the Facebook generation. I've been told that Facebook is no longer hip and cool, right? Is that true? It's all Instagram these days? Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. That's true. So go grab a cup of coffee and then come back. It's going to be a couple minutes before you're ready to hit the button. Now, luckily for us here in Adobe Media Encoder, we're still going to use that exact same H.264 preset that we were using last week and the two previous weeks. So all of this stuff, we're good to go, all right? There's a direct bridge between After Effects and Media Encoder. So it's going to honor the frame rate, the composition size, all of our composition settings that we established inside of After Effects have now been transitioned over into the Adobe Media Encoder queue, which is pretty great, The only thing that I need to do is just be mindful as to where I'm saving the file. And since I was a good media manager, look, it's trying to put it, let's do this. I want to put it on my desktop just so I know where it is on my desktop. Let's save. And then lastly, hit the gigantic green button. My animation is only 6 seconds, so it's going to take but about 10 seconds to encode this bad boy. It goes pretty fast. Let's see what we got here. Now I still have After Effects open in the background. There it goes. Voila. Mission accomplished. Let's hide Media Encoder and also hide After Effects. And there it is, sitting on my desktop is the MP4 of my silly little animation. Whoops, I opened a couple different things. Dun, da, da, da. Wonderful. And now this is in a video format that I can either send to the web, or if I change the codec and some other quality settings, I can begin to cut this into a film. Okay. One of the great things about working with After Effects is that it is a broadcast-ready tool. So we can use this for really high-end animations for our cinema and television workflows. Okay, it's pretty great. Like one of the things that we can do instead of After Effects that we can't really do in other applications is to export video files that have an embedded alpha channel on it. So we can have that transparency information. We can layer our animated graphics on top of other video files. It's pretty rad. Pretty cool. That's how the big boys do it, the big dogs. Okay, so our mission this week for our homework is to go through this entire animation process again. Your job is to animate, kind of reanimate, if you will, the bouncing ball project that we worked on early in the semester. However, this time I want you to try to do all of this inside of After Effects. Okay, so find a circular image, like a Starbucks logo, or find a picture of a ball, or make a picture of a ball, right? Since After Effects is this grand Swiss Army knife, you can use any file format that you find or create out there on the web. Shoot, you can even bring in an Illustrator file, okay? That's how robust of an import-export system After Effects has, okay? So find something or create something on the web that's representative of what you want to animate, okay? Then animate a little ball bouncing across the frame. Also, try to make a background or include a background as well, okay? The whole idea behind this animation is that we're going to get up and running with the After Effects animation pipeline, okay? Because it is different, and I know that you guys are going to run into some problems and some questions along the road, okay? Remember our keyframing process. That's going to be the big one, okay? You're likely to be animating both the position and the rotation of your ball, or I would encourage you to do that. Squash and stretch can very easily be accomplished by animating the scale of your object by unchecking, by unchecking the little link here, now I can disproportionately scale my logo, right? I can squish it if I'd like, okay? You can just squash and stretch, okay? So have fun with this animation. It's just kind of a way for us to get introduced to working inside of After Effects. When you're done with this animation, I'd like you to render it out using the H.264 preset that ships with every project file that we import into Adobe Media Encoder, and then export your render to the Dropbox on Canvas. Sound good? Everyone clear on what we're doing? Should be a pretty fun one. Yes, sir?
Point out that After Effects also has a layer system.
Yes, and it has a great layer system. Right. Yeah, that's how we can do backgrounds too. It's pretty great. After Effects is a really, really fantastic application. It's one of those tools that I think once you start getting used to working with it, you're going to find it invaluable, and it's going to be, it's going to be part of your animation life every day going forward. It's that robust and an important tool for us. Okay. Questions on what we're going to do for our homework? All right. Let's get to work. Let's do it. I'll walk around and help you guys out because I know you guys are going to have some questions.